Marcus Reed had been living alone in the wilderness for 7 years now. His weathered hands gripped the old hunting rifle as he watched a deer through the scope, but his finger hesitated on the trigger. The animal reminded him too much of the gentleness he once knew, the softness he had lost forever. The mountain cabin he called home was nothing more than 4 walls and a leaking roof. Inside, empty bottles lined the shelves where family photos once stood. He had burned those pictures 3 winters ago during a particularly brutal blizzard, claiming he needed the fuel. The truth was harder to admit. Seeing their faces had become unbearable. Before the accident, Marcus had been a different man entirely. He worked as a park ranger, protecting the very wilderness that now served as his prison. His wife, Sarah, would pack him lunches with little notes tucked inside, and his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, would beg to come along on his easier patrols. They lived in a cozy house near the park entrance, with a white picket fence and a garden where Sarah grew tomatoes and sunflowers. The morning of the accident had started like any other. Emma had a school field trip planned to the nature center, and Sarah was volunteering as a chaperone. Marcus was supposed to join them after finishing his morning rounds, but a report of illegal hunters in the north sector had delayed him. He radioed Sarah to go ahead without him, promising to meet them at the butterfly exhibit by noon. He never made it to that exhibit. By the time he arrived at the nature center, emergency vehicles filled the parking lot. A drunk driver had run a red light, slamming into the school bus at full speed. The impact had been so severe that the bus flipped 3 times before coming to rest in a drainage ditch. Marcus had run toward the wreckage, his heart pounding as he searched frantically among the chaos. He found Sarah first, her hand still clutching the volunteer badge she had been so proud to wear. She was unconscious but breathing. Emma was trapped near the back of the bus, her small body pinned under twisted metal. Her eyes found his through the smoke and confusion. "Daddy," she had whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of sirens and crying children. "I waited for you at the butterflies, but you never came." Those were the last words his daughter ever spoke to him. She died at the hospital 3 hours later, her tiny hand growing cold in his. Sarah followed 2 days later, never having regained consciousness. The doctor said she had suffered massive internal bleeding, and even if she had survived, the brain damage would have been severe. Marcus had blamed himself entirely. If he had been there, maybe he could have protected them. If he had ignored the Hunter report and kept his promise, his family would still be alive. The guilt consumed him like a poison, eating away at everything good inside him until only bitterness remained. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and sympathetic faces. Colleagues from the Park Service tried to support him, but Marcus pushed everyone away. He took a leave of absence that became permanent resignation. The house with its white fence felt like a museum of broken dreams, so he sold it and used the money to buy supplies and the old cabin in the remote mountains. For 7 years he had survived on hunting, fishing, and the occasional supply run to the nearest town 40 miles away. The townspeople knew his story. Tragedy traveled fast in small communities, but they respected his desire for solitude. The general store owner, Mrs. Patterson, always had his usual supplies ready without forcing conversation. Marcus had developed a routine that kept him functional, if not happy. He checked his snares at dawn, chopped wood in the afternoon, and spent evenings sitting on his porch with a bottle of whiskey, watching the sun disappear behind the peaks. He talked to no one except the occasional hiker who stumbled across his property, and even then, he kept conversations brief and unwelcoming. The wilderness had changed him physically, too. His dark hair was now streaked with premature gray, and deep lines carved his face like canyons. His once muscular frame had grown lean and hard, shaped by years of physical labor and poor nutrition. A thick beard covered scars from countless mishaps, burns from the wood stove, cuts from careless knife work, bruises from stumbling home, drunk in the dark. Animals had learned to avoid his territory. He was an efficient hunter when necessity demanded it, but he took no pleasure in the kill anymore. Everything was about survival, about making it through another day without having to feel or remember or hope for anything better. The cabin itself reflected his internal state. What had once been someone's weekend retreat was now a monument to neglect. Windows were boarded up after being broken by falling branches he had been too indifferent to clear. The front steps sagged dangerously, and the roof leaked in at least a dozen places. Inside, his few possessions were scattered without care. Hunting gear, canned food, a mattress on the floor, and always the bottles. He had no electricity, no phone, no connection to the outside world except for his monthly trips to town for supplies. News of the world beyond his mountain might as well have been stories from another planet. Presidents could change, wars could start and end, technology could advance, and Marcus would remain untouched by it all, frozen in his private hell of grief and self-imposed exile. Sometimes, in his clearer moments, he wondered what Sarah and Emma would think of what he had become. Would they recognize the man who once sang lullabies and told bedtime stories? Would they understand why their husband and father had chosen this path of slow-motion suicide? But these thoughts were too painful to sustain, and he would reach for another bottle to silence them. The seasons passed unmarked except by their practical demands. Summer brought fishing and berry gathering. Fall meant hunting season and woodcutting for winter. Winter was about survival, rationing food and fuel while snow blocked the mountain roads for months. Spring offered a brief renewal of life around him, though none of that renewal ever seemed to touch his soul. Local wildlife had adapted to his presence. Deer would graze near his cabin at dusk, understanding somehow that this particular human posed little threat. Bears knew to avoid his territory during salmon season, respecting an unspoken boundary. Even the mountain cats that occasionally passed through treated him with indifferent tolerance rather than fear or aggression. Marcus had become part of the wilderness landscape, as much a fixture as the ancient pines and granite outcroppings. He blended into the environment so completely that hikers sometimes passed within yards of his cabin without noticing it, mistaking the weathered structure for natural rock formation or fallen tree. The isolation suited him perfectly. There were no expectations to meet, no social conventions to observe, no reminders of the life he had lost. Each day was exactly like the last, and that predictability was the closest thing to peace he could manage. He had convinced himself that this was enough, that existing without truly living was a fair trade for avoiding further pain. But life has a way of disrupting even the most carefully constructed isolation. Change comes whether we invite it or not, often in forms we never expect. For Marcus Reed, that change was about to arrive in the form of a small, lost child who would call him by a name he thought he would never hear again. The sound of crying woke Marcus from his afternoon stupor on the porch. At first, he thought it might be wind through the pines or perhaps a wounded animal, but as his whiskey-fogged mind cleared, he recognized the unmistakable sound of a child in distress. His blood ran cold. Stumbling to his feet, Marcus grabbed his rifle and moved cautiously toward the sound. In 7 years of isolation, no child had ever wandered this far into the wilderness. The nearest hiking trail was miles away, and this deep into the mountains. Even experienced outdoorsmen rarely ventured. Through the trees, he spotted a flash of bright pink fabric. A little girl, no more than 5 or 6 years old, sat huddled against a fallen log. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her dark hair tangled with leaves and twigs. She was sobbing with the exhausted desperation of someone who had been crying for hours. Marcus froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. The child's size, her age, even the way she held herself reminded him so forcefully of Emma that for a moment he wondered if he was hallucinating. 7 years of isolation and alcohol had played tricks on his mind before. but never anything this vivid. The little girl looked up at his approach, her tear-streaked face showing no fear despite his wild appearance. Instead, her eyes lit up with recognition and relief. "Father!" she cried out, scrambling to her feet and running toward him with arms outstretched. Marcus stepped backward, nearly tripping over a root. "No, no, wait!" he stammered, holding up his hands. "I'm not—" "You don't know me, little girl. I'm not your father." But the child threw herself at his legs, wrapping her small arms around them and burying her face against his dirty jeans. "I found you," she whispered. "I knew you would be here. I looked everywhere." The weight of her small body against him, the trust in her voice, broke something inside Marcus that he thought had been permanently sealed off. His hands hovered uncertainly above her head, wanting to comfort but afraid to touch, afraid that she might disappear if he acknowledged this was real. "What's your name?" he asked gently, his voice rusty from disuse. "Lily," she said, looking up at him with eyes so dark they seemed almost black. "Lily Chen. I'm 6 years old, and I've been looking for my father for so long." "Lily, I need you to listen to me carefully," Marcus said, crouching down to her level. "I'm not your father. My name is Marcus, and I live alone here. Where are your real parents? How did you get so far into the mountains?" The child's face crumpled with confusion. "But you are my father," she insisted. "Mama showed me your picture before she went to heaven. She said you lived in the mountains where the tall trees grow, and that if anything happened, I should find you." Marcus felt the world tilt around him. "What was your mother's name?" he asked, though he was certain he had never known anyone named Chen. "Mama's name was Lin," Lily said. "Lin Chen. She was very sick for a long time, and the doctors couldn't make her better. Before she died, she told me about you. She said you were brave and kind, and that you would take care of me." None of this made sense to Marcus. He had no memory of any woman named Lin Chen, no history that could explain why this child believed he was her father. Yet something in Lily's certainty, in the way she looked at him, stirred memories he couldn't quite grasp. "Lily, I think there's been a mistake," he said carefully. "Let me take you to town. There are people there who can help find your real family, your real father." "No!" Lily's voice rose in panic. "You can't leave me again. Mama said you had to go away before I was born, but that you would come back someday. She said you lived in a place where it was always quiet, where you could think about important things." The description was unsettlingly accurate. Marcus studied the child's face more carefully, looking for any feature that might trigger recognition. Her eyes were dark, like her mother's must have been, but her nose, the shape of her chin, even the way she held her head when she was thinking, there was something familiar there, something that made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. "When did your mother die?" he asked. 2 weeks ago, Lily said matter-of-factly. "The social worker lady said I would have to go live with strangers in a big city far away. But I remembered what Mama told me about finding you, so I ran away." Marcus's mind reeled. A 6-year-old child had somehow traveled from wherever she had been staying through dangerous wilderness to find him. The logistics seemed impossible, yet here she was, exhausted and hungry, but alive. "How did you get here? It's miles and miles from anywhere." "I followed the stream," Lily said proudly. "Mama taught me that streams and mountains always flow down toward people, but I followed it up instead, toward where it came from. I ate berries and drank water from the creek. I slept under trees. It took me 4 days." 4 days. A 6-year-old child had survived 4 days in wilderness that challenged experienced hikers. Marcus felt a mixture of horror at the danger she had faced and grudging admiration for her determination and resourcefulness. "Are you hungry?" he asked, the basic human need to care for a child overriding his confusion. Lily nodded eagerly. "Very hungry. Do you have food, Father?" "Stop calling me that," Marcus said, but without harshness. Call me Marcus until we figure this out." He led her back to his cabin, hyper-aware of how the place must look to a child. The broken steps, the cluttered interior, the smell of alcohol and unwashed dishes. It was no place for anyone, let alone a little girl. Inside, he cleared a space at his small table and heated a can of soup on his wood-burning stove. Lily sat quietly, taking in her surroundings without judgment. When he set the bowl in front of her, she ate with the methodical efficiency of someone who had recently known real hunger. "Tell me more about your mother," Marcus said, sitting across from her with his own bowl of soup that he couldn't quite manage to eat. "She was a nurse," Lily said between spoonfuls. "She worked at the hospital in the city. She was very pretty and very smart. She could speak 3 languages, English and Chinese and, I forget the third one." "Did she ever mention my last name? Or where she met me?" Lily scrunched up her face in concentration. "She said you worked in the forest, taking care of animals and trees. She said you were the bravest man she ever met, but that you had to go away because something very sad happened to you." Marcus felt his breath catch. The description could fit his old job as a park ranger, but the timeline didn't make sense. 7 years ago, he had been married to Sarah. He had never been unfaithful, never had any relationship that could have resulted in a child. Yet as he watched Lily eat, he found himself noticing more similarities. The way she tilted her head when listening, just like he did. The careful way she held her spoon, the same methodical approach he had always taken to tasks. The stubborn set of her jaw when she concentrated. He had seen that expression in his own mirror countless times. "Lily," he said slowly, "what year were you born?" 2019, she said promptly. "Mama made me memorize it for important papers." Marcus did quick mental math. That would mean she was conceived in late 2018 or early 2019. But that was impossible. His family had died in 2018, and he had moved to the mountains immediately afterward. There was no gap in time where he could have met Lin Chen, no period of his life unaccounted for. Unless... Marcus felt a chill as a memory surfaced. After the funeral, before he moved to the mountains, there had been several weeks that remained mostly blank in his memory. Weeks of heavy drinking, of wandering aimlessly, of trying to numb the pain enough to figure out how to go on living. He had vague recollections of bars, of strangers' faces, of waking up in places he didn't remember going to. Could something have happened during that lost time? Could he have met someone, sought comfort in another person's arms, while too drunk and grief-stricken to remember clearly? The possibility made him feel sick with shame and confusion. "Do you have any pictures of your mother?" he asked. Lily reached into her small backpack. He hadn't noticed before that she was carrying anything, and pulled out a worn photograph. She handed it to him with the reverence of someone sharing a treasured possession. Marcus looked down at the photo and felt his world shift on its axis. The woman in the picture was beautiful, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She was wearing scrubs, standing outside what looked like a hospital. And in her arms was a newborn baby with a shock of dark hair. He didn't remember her face specifically, but something about her expression, the compassion in her eyes, struck him as familiar. More importantly, the baby in her arms, even as a newborn, the resemblance to his own baby pictures, was unmistakable. "This is you?" he asked, pointing to the infant. Lily nodded. "Mama said I was the most beautiful baby in the whole hospital. She said my father would have been so proud if he could have seen me." Marcus stared at the photograph until his eyes burned. The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling. The timeline worked, barely. The physical resemblance was undeniable. And most convincing of all was the way Lily looked at him, with the absolute certainty of a child who had never doubted her mother's words. Whether or not she was truly his biological daughter, this little girl believed he was her father. She had risked everything to find him, guided only by her dying mother's directions and her own unwavering faith. She was alone in the world, with no one else to claim her or care for her. Marcus looked around his cabin with new eyes, seeing it as Lily must see it, not as a refuge from the world, but as a home where she finally belonged. The broken steps could be fixed, the roof could be patched, the empty bottles could be thrown away. For the first time in 7 years, Marcus felt something other than numbness or pain. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely unexpected. It felt like possibility. The first night was the hardest. Marcus had given Lily his bed while he slept on the floor, but neither of them got much rest. She cried quietly for her mother, and he lay awake staring at the ceiling, wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. By morning, he had made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. "Lily," he said over breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, "I need to tell you something important. I don't know for certain if I'm your biological father. There are things about that time in my life that I don't remember clearly. But regardless of DNA, if you want to stay with me, I'll take care of you." Lily looked up from her eggs with perfect seriousness. "DNA is what makes people related, right? Like how I have Mama's eyes, but maybe your nose?" Marcus nodded, impressed by her understanding. "That's right." "Well, DNA is just science stuff," she said with the wisdom of a much older person. "Being someone's father is about love and taking care of each other. Mama said that's what makes a real family." Her simple acceptance humbled him. While he had been agonizing over genetics and legal complications, this little girl had already embraced what mattered most. She needed a parent, and he needed... Well, he was beginning to realize he needed her just as much. Over the following days, Marcus began the overwhelming task of transforming his hermit's existence into something suitable for a child. The first priority was making the cabin safe and comfortable. He fixed the broken steps, patched the worst of the roof leaks, and cleared away 7 years' worth of accumulated debris and empty bottles. Lily proved to be a surprisingly helpful assistant. She was too young for heavy work, but she had an uncanny ability to anticipate what he needed and hand him tools before he asked. More importantly, her presence motivated him in ways he hadn't expected. Every improvement to the cabin felt meaningful because he was doing it for her. "Why did you live like this?" she asked one afternoon while he was replacing a broken window. "Mama always kept our apartment very clean and pretty." Marcus paused in his work, considering how to explain 7 years of self-destruction to a 6-year-old. When someone you love very much dies, sometimes the sadness gets so big that it's hard to care about anything else, he said finally. "I let the sadness make me forget how to take care of myself." "Are you still sad about the people who died?" "Yes," he said honestly. "I'll always be sad about them. But having you here helps me remember that there are still good things in life worth caring about." Lily nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her. "Mama was sad when she talked about you. She said losing people you love is the hardest thing in the world, but that love doesn't die even when people do." The wisdom in her words caught Marcus off guard. Through Lily, he was learning about the woman who had apparently borne his child, and every story painted a picture of someone remarkable, compassionate, strong, and wise beyond her years. As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself changing in ways both subtle and profound. He started bathing regularly and trimming his beard. He began planning meals instead of just eating whatever was easiest to prepare. He even started talking more, partly because Lily asked endless questions about everything from why leaves changed color to how fish could breathe underwater. Teaching her became one of his greatest pleasures. He showed her how to identify different birds by their calls, how to read weather patterns in cloud formations, and how to move quietly through the forest without disturbing wildlife. She was an eager student with a natural aptitude for outdoor skills that reinforced his growing conviction that she belonged here with him. But the outside world couldn't be ignored forever. Marcus knew he needed to address Lily's legal status, her education, and her healthcare needs. The thought of dealing with social services terrified him. What if they decided a reformed hermit living in a mountain cabin wasn't a suitable guardian for a young girl? "Lily," he said one evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch watching stars appear. "We need to go to town soon. There are official things we need to take care of, papers that need to be signed so you can stay with me legally." She looked worried. "What if they say you can't keep me?" "Then we'll figure something else out," he promised. "I won't let them take you away if that's not what you want." The trip to town was Marcus's first extended contact with civilization in years. Mrs. Patterson at the general store barely recognized him, clean, sober, and accompanied by a well-dressed little girl who called him father with obvious affection. "Marcus Reed," she exclaimed. "I haven't seen you looking this well in years. And who is this beautiful young lady?" "This is Lily," Marcus said, his hand protective on the child's shoulder. She's my daughter." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline, but small-town discretion prevented her from asking obvious questions. Instead, she smiled warmly at Lily and offered her a piece of candy from the jar behind the counter. The meeting with social services was less welcoming. The caseworker, a harried woman named Jennifer Walsh, was clearly skeptical about the entire situation. "Mr. Reed," she said, reviewing the file on her desk, "Lily Chen was reported as a missing person 2 weeks ago. The state had placement ready for her with a lovely family in Denver. Now you're claiming to be her father, despite having no previous contact with either her or her deceased mother?" "I understand your concerns," Marcus said, forcing himself to remain calm. "I'm requesting a paternity test to establish biological relationship. In the meantime, Lily is clearly thriving in my care." It was true. In just a few weeks, the frightened, exhausted child who had appeared at his cabin had transformed into a confident, happy little girl. She sat quietly during the interview, but her body language made it clear where her loyalties lay. She stayed close to Marcus, holding his hand, occasionally whispering comments that made him smile. "Even if paternity is established," Ms. Walsh continued, "there are other concerns. You live in an isolated area with no electricity or phone service. There's no school within reasonable distance. Lily needs medical care, dental care, social interaction with children her age." Each concern was valid, and Marcus had been thinking about them all. "I'm willing to make whatever changes necessary to provide properly for Lily. If that means moving closer to town, installing a phone line, enrolling her in school, I'll do whatever it takes." The sincerity in his voice seemed to reach the social worker. Her expression softened slightly as she observed the obvious bond between man and child. "There's something else," she said, pulling another file from her stack. "I've been researching Lin Chen's background, trying to understand why she might have directed Lily to find you. It turns out she was working at Presbyterian Hospital in Denver 8 years ago. Does that name ring any bells?" Marcus felt his chest tighten. Presbyterian Hospital was where Sarah and Emma had been taken after the accident. He had spent 3 days there, mostly in the trauma waiting room, watching his world fall apart. "Yes," he said quietly. "My wife and daughter were treated there after a car accident. They both died." Ms. Walsh nodded sympathetically. "According to hospital records, Lin Chen was one of the trauma nurses during that time. It's possible she met you there during your family's crisis." The missing pieces began falling into place. In those hellish days at the hospital, Marcus had been approached by many staff members, doctors updating him on his family's condition, nurses offering comfort, chaplains providing counseling he was too numb to accept. If Lin Chen had been one of those nurses, if she had seen him at his lowest point and somehow felt moved to offer compassion, She was very kind to sad people, Lily said suddenly, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the office. Mama always helped people who were hurting. She said that's what nurses do. They fix broken bodies and broken hearts. Ms. Walsh looked at Lily with new interest. Tell me about your mother, sweetie. What was she like? She was the best mama in the whole world, Lily said proudly. She worked very hard to take care of sick people, and she took care of me too. When she got sick, she made me promise to find my father because she said he would love me just like she did. And how do you feel about Mr. Reed? About staying with him? He is my father, Lily said with absolute certainty. He teaches me things and makes me feel safe. He was very sad when I found him, but now he smiles sometimes. I think we help each other not be sad anymore. The simple honesty of her answer seemed to settle something in Ms. Walsh's mind. All right, she said, making notes in her file. We'll expedite the paternity testing, and I'll schedule a home visit within the next month. In the meantime, Mr. Reed, I need your commitment that you'll begin making the necessary arrangements for Lily's education and health care. You have it, Marcus said immediately. That afternoon, Marcus and Lily drove to the nearest larger town to look at houses. The idea of leaving his mountain sanctuary was painful, but Lily's needs had to come first. They found a small house on the edge of town, close enough for school and services, but with enough land and privacy to maintain some of their wilderness lifestyle. Will you miss the cabin? Lily asked as they explored the house's backyard, which bordered on undeveloped forest. Yes, Marcus admitted. But home isn't really about the building. It's about the people you share it with. The paternity test results arrived 3 weeks later, confirming what Marcus had already accepted in his heart. Lily Chen was indeed his biological daughter. The news brought relief, validation, and a renewed sense of purpose that had been missing from his life for so long. On moving day, as they packed the last of their belongings from the mountain cabin, Marcus found Lily sitting on the porch steps, looking thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling beside her. "I was thinking about Mama," she said. "I think she knew this would happen. I think she knew you needed someone to love just as much as I needed a father." Marcus felt tears threaten for the first time since she'd arrived. Not tears of grief, but tears of gratitude. "Your mama was very wise. She said love is like a circle," Lily continued. "When you give it away, it comes back to you, but bigger. Do you think that's true?" Looking at this remarkable little girl who had somehow found her way to him across impossible odds, who had given him reason to rejoin the world and remember how to live instead of merely survive, Marcus knew exactly what Lin Chen had meant. "Yes," he said, wrapping his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "I think that's very true." As they drove away from the mountain cabin toward their new life together, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought them both to this moment. He had lost everything that mattered to him, retreated from the world, and spent 7 years believing his story was over. But stories, he was learning, don't end when we think they do. Sometimes they just begin a new chapter, one we never saw coming but desperately needed. Lily had given him back his purpose, his hope, and his capacity for joy. In return, he could give her the father she had always believed in. Not perfect, but present and committed to being worthy of her faith. The future stretched ahead of them, full of challenges and uncertainties, but also full of possibilities. School enrollment, doctor visits, birthday parties, bedtime stories, scraped knees, and proud moments. All the beautiful, ordinary complexities of raising a child. Marcus had thought he was done with being a father. It turned out he was just getting started.